So originally this video was going to be called something else, but after scripting it, stepping away, and mellowing out for a bit, I realized that the video was mostly just me venting out my frustration about a past video topic in an unhealthy way. So, this is the slightly healthier version, although I probably am still gonna be pretty miffed for a bit of this, I won't lie. This actually relates back to a video I did a few months ago. I don't want to refer to it too much. Anyone who watched the videos in question will probably figure it out pretty quickly, but the context of that particular situation is sorta necessary, so basically it goes as follows. A non-binary artist with a variety of mental health issues would create their own original characters, the most prominent of which was based on themselves, and portray them in situations based on the artist's own delusions. It also demonstrated elements of abusive relationships, which also reflected what the artist was dealing with in their private life. Many of these emotions were focused into the artist's work. In and just after high school, this artist had an extreme falling out with a group of friends, also themselves artists, as the artist exhibited emotionally and physically abusive, possessive behavior, and would threaten self-harm to manipulate those now ex-friends. A few years later, another artist, someone who was completely unconnected to the previous events, made a video vaguely referring to these past events through secondhand testimony screenshots, and then coupled that with much more serious, unsubstantiated claims primarily based on unfavorable outside interpretations of the artist's work. Oh, and the unfavorable interpretations came from the ex-friends of the artist, as is the case with so many things on my channel, because it's like none of us can escape it. The unfavorable interpretations basically claim that the artist was creating, how far into this video am I? Content that would appeal to people who like small, underdeveloped humans in an inappropriate setting. I'm sure you're clever enough to figure out the code. And you know, normally my main issue would be with the false allegations, right? It's damaging to a person's mental health, to their career, to their self-esteem, all that hullabaloo. If you accuse people of serious offenses, especially in a public forum, the person generally faces consequences for it, even if it's not true. Sometimes from their audience, sometimes from their employers, sometimes within their personal and familial relationships. That's why spreading false information directed against a single individual can be so detrimental. It punishes someone who doesn't necessarily deserve to be punished, condemns them in the public eye, and unfairly forces them into a more difficult and stressful position, and they're the ones left picking up the pieces of their reputation while the accuser gets to fuck off to Maui Clout Island or something. And yes, this is going to be a thing that applies to future videos, because hey-ho, it never stops. But see, that's not the only thing I'm mad at. I'm mad that a bunch of artists saw fit to censor another artist because they didn't like that person's work. Not because the work was illegal, or because the artist was purposely trying to goad people on or hurt people, but because the work of that artist, who drew this character based off of themselves with self-harm scars shared by the artist, which carried themes of their struggles with mental health issues, made people uncomfortable. In an ideal world, the response to that would be, well, no, duh, it makes you uncomfortable, it's about mental illness. Mental health struggles are not a cakewalk in the park, it's more like a punch in the face, or a fire in your brain, or rats under your skin, or the weight of the planet pressing down on you, or your body crumbling underneath you. Point is, that's why they're called struggles. And artistically, there are a lot of different ways that they can be expressed, shared, and experienced. As with, I'm discovering, many recurring issues in the present day, this could easily be blamed on the internet since, in this case in particular, it would be considered the prolific supplier of art. In our everyday lives, the art that we choose to surround ourselves with is generally catered to our own emotional needs. We seek out art that speaks to each of us on an individual level, and in cases where people are privileged enough to do so, we put together this little bubble of artwork that makes us feel the most comfortable. A balanced artistic stasis. Yet there's always the chance that stasis gets interrupted. On the internet, in all of the feeds and timelines and homepages a person scrolls through, they're bound to come across art that they don't particularly like. Opinions too, and keep that in mind for some talking points, but we're not strictly talking about that today. Whether that be because they don't like how it looks, or because they don't relate to it, or because the piece and its themes actively elicit negative emotions from the viewer. And I'm probably very wrong on this, but it looks like, within that little bubble of meticulously catered comfort, some artists have gotten it into their heads that art that makes you uncomfortable doesn't have a right to exist. Boy, have I got news for you! That was a long intro, but I'll work with it. Blah blah, hi-ho dealio. Artists trying to cancel each other for their personal subjective tastes is dumb. This is basically like the most recent iteration of an art rant. I don't like this art, change it. It's some of the most entitled bullshit I've had the displeasure of coming across in the art community, and the fact that it was coming from and being predominantly spread by other artists was so infuriating. Even more so, knowing that it will happen again, it has happened again, many times that I've seen since this particular situation. Are you guys kidding me? Have you lost your senses? Like, am I the crazy one here? In what world has it ever been acceptable to demand that an artist change the nature of their work because it offends your precious sensibilities? Excuse me? No. No, no. That's not how that works. Did we all just forget that freedom of expression is like a thing? When you go to a gallery, do you scream and holler if you come across a piece you don't like? Or do you do the sensible thing and just keep walking? Why can't that apply online? Why can't these people just keep scrolling? Even more baffling is that the work of the artist from the situation I'm referring to, not even the most recent example of this, doesn't even begin to border on the levels of some of the more controversial artists and art pieces in the world. But despite that, people managed to rile themselves into hypocritical frenzies regardless, not only berating this artist for pieces that were factually not the romanticizing of mental health or promotion of self-harm they were claimed to be, but also for artistic choices that the accusers were blatantly also including in their own artwork. And do you want to know why I'm specifically so angry about that? Because they tried to use the artist's work to portray them as a bad person. Can you imagine what a horrible precedent that would set? To judge whether an artist was a good person based on an interpretation of their work relayed by someone else who's never even met them? Hang on, I'm gonna read one line from my original script. A random 19-year-old saying that the work of someone they actively don't like is borderline pedophilic doesn't mean the work is actually pedophilic, you borderline dumb fucks. Sorry, I just happened to think that was funny. Is this based on ignorance? Must be, because if it wasn't, then I'd only have to assume it was based on malice. Or perhaps jealousy, in the vein of, I can't do what you can do, so you have to stop doing it so I can feel better about myself. And so to all of those artists who managed to be convinced that this work was so bad that it needed to stop existing, I have one question for you. Have you guys not seen how disturbing and gross art can be? Have you guys not stared at a piece so visceral you had to clutch your heart so you could hold out? Have you not felt the shudder of a visual story permeating through your body? Have you not had to avert your eyes in disgust only to try and glance back with a macabre sense of curiosity? Have none of y'all gone to art school? Okay, in fairness, that was a lot more than one question, but I'll help you understand my point. Because if you had, I imagine it would have been explained at some point that art isn't always candy and roses, and can sometimes express really dark and depressing subject matters. Though I suppose if you hadn't, and you were overall ignorant to the broader art world, then you might be tricked by someone who presents this work with subject matter you've never seen, or which focuses on themes that you've been told over and over by the community as a whole, because it's not like the general community could be just as uninformed and stupid, are bad to include in your art, then sure, they might be able to trick you into thinking that this work is bad, quote unquote. But then how do you react to works that are seen as being objectively more disturbing, but which are still put on display? Do you tear them off the walls of galleries in protest? Do you make videos ascribing how these famous dead artists promote harmful rhetoric in their pieces? Or do you not bother because it's easier to go after a single, still living artist with acknowledged mental health and relationship issues, and to then send hordes of people after them anonymously over the internet? See? Malice. Whew. And that's not even discussing the damage that this practice does on other, generally younger artists who are exploring the same or similar themes or tropes as the ones being publicly scrutinized. Honestly, it always ends up being younger artists who then have to keep their work in line with these arbitrary, ever-changing hypocritical standards. To relate directly back to the videos that spawned this ramble, do you have any idea how many comments I got from young artists expressing relief that they were not actually bad people for including their own mental health struggles in their work? Yeah, it's a surprise to absolutely no one that the people who get tricked into pushing this "your art is bad, therefore you are bad" narrative are either young or otherwise largely uninformed about art as a whole. Ignorance is malleable and something these people can direct. Mostly because if you're ignorant about something, you can be convinced to be mad about it because you essentially don't know any better. If you've ever had a family member who told you half-truths to get you on their side, only for your opinion to change when you hear the full story, it's kinda like that. The family member is the person peddling this narrative. The half-truth is the claim that the art is gross and bad for that reason. And the full story is the context of all of modern and historical art on record. Oh, you don't understand the broader implications of disturbing art and expression? Okay, well, this artist draws gore and self-harm. That's bad, right? So they're bad. Go tell them as such. All this does is vilify and hurt people, and for the malicious propagators of this harmful narrative, that's really all they want most of the time. This narrative often then comes right back around to bite them in the ass, because they don't think ahead or really consider what they're promoting. They look for things to complain about and just present it in a way to make someone else look bad, even if those bad actions are things they've done themselves and will continue to do in the future. Why? Because the actions are not actually bad. They're just framed as such for the purposes of vilifying the artist being called out. This really is one of the rare cases where don't like, don't watch works, because the art isn't being critiqued or criticized, it's being argued as to whether or not it's allowed to exist. So much of this issue wouldn't be an issue if people weren't so wrapped up in their own comfortable little art bubbles. If the propagator preached their narrative to an audience that was intimately aware of the broader scope of disturbing art, that narrative would gain no traction. How can someone convince a group of artists that the work of another is bad and shouldn't be made if those artists are aware of objectively more disturbing and controversial pieces that are displayed in galleries, taught about in classrooms, and adored by millions? Well, for one thing, convincing them is then made significantly more difficult, and who doesn't enjoy making life difficult for people who try to expose and lie about those they don't like? So, as per many things in life, the solution is to educate yourself. Or have someone else do it in the form of a video where they explain that controversial art exists and it's not the end of the world if an artist explores themes that make you or others uncomfortable. If y'all aren't expecting me to list off a bunch of visually or conceptually disturbing, creepy, and controversial art in ascending date of creation, and that this sentence isn't just a preemptive warning so that you know to avert your eyes if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, The Triumph of Death, Peter Bruegel the Elder, 1562. Massacre of the Innocents, Peter Paul Rubens, 1611. Judith slaying Holofernes, Artemisia Gentileschi, 1612. Heads of Torture Victims, Study for the Raft of the Medusa, Theodore Géricault, 1814. The Disasters of War series, Francisco Goya, 1810 to 1820. The Slave Ship, J.M.W. Turner, 1840. Diomedes being eaten by his horses, Gustave Moreau, 1865. The Face of War, Salvador Dali, 1940. Painting, Francis Bacon, 1946. Equally, his study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X, 1953. Big Electric Chair, Andy Warhol, 1967. Deterioration of Mind Over Matter, Otto Rapp, 1973. The Young Family, Patricia Piccinini, 2002. Mark Quinn's Self-Portraits, 1991 to 2011. Embrace the Bass, Andrea Hassler, 2013. Tree, Paul McCarthy, 2014. Jonathan Payne's Fleshlets, The Disturbing Anatomical Works of Valerio Caruba, The Collective Photography of Joel Peter Witkin. Basically all of the works of Zdzislaw Beksinski. I mean, when you really think about it, artists love to depict scary or gruesome topics. It's almost like there's a reason behind that. Almost like, I don't know, art is a tool for emotional expression that can range throughout the entire human emotional spectrum. Or are you honestly of the delusion that art is only supposed to make you feel happy, nice emotions, and no art piece will ever make you question or bring attention to an uncomfortable topic? You can dislike a piece of art, I'm not saying that you can't. You can ramble on about how much you dislike it and exactly why. But how much of a spoiled child do you have to be to demand that something you don't like stop existing at the expense of someone else's enjoyment or artistic expression? More so, to demand that the creative works of a single person are not allowed to exist because you personally don't enjoy them. For reasons outside of the art itself, I might add. It's almost like that's childish behavior. And because I don't want this entire video to just be me rambling semi-incoherently about why this is stupid and makes me mad, here are my proper arguments for why you shouldn't do that. Part 1. Controversy. Bruh, you haven't even seen controversial art if this is what you're non-maliciously concerned over. Art can be labeled as controversial for a variety of different reasons. Some, yes, having to do with themes directly portrayed within the art itself. Other subjects of issue could have to do with the placement, the medium of choice, the visuals, or even for the feelings and actions evoked within the audience. Yes, there are cases of people going, the art made me do a bad thing, so the art is to blame. Yoko Ono's Cut Piece and Marina Abramovic's Rhythm Zero were performative pieces that directly hinged on audience participation. Cut Piece, originally performed in 1964, instructed the audience that they were allowed to cut pieces of fabric from the suit worn by the motionless, expressionless artist Ono as she sat alone on a stage. Audience interaction ranged from hesitant participants cautiously removing a piece of clothing from her sleeve or skirt, to more bold participants who would cut cloth from her blouse or bra. All the while, Ono did not interact with them. Equally, Rhythm Zero was Marina Abramovic's 6-hour performative exhibit from a decade later in 1974. Abramovic would stand still on a stage along with her exhibit visitors, indicating that they were also a part of this piece, whilst 72 various objects, a feather boa, a rose, olive oil, honey, perfume, nails, grapes, wine, scissors, a scalpel, a metal bar, a gun with a single bullet loaded, etc., and a set of instructions were placed on a nearby table. The instructions read, Instructions. There are 72 objects on the table that one can use on me as desired. Performance. I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility. Duration, 6 hours, 8 p.m. to 2 p.m. Thomas McEvely, an art critic present for the performance, wrote about the events that transpired. It began tamely. Someone turned her around. Someone thrust her arms into the air. Someone touched her somewhat intimately. The Neapolitan night began to heat up. In the third hour, all her clothes were cut from her with razor blades. In the fourth hour, the same blades began to expose her skin. Her throat was slashed so someone could suck her blood. Various minor sexual assaults were carried out on her body. She was so committed to the piece that she would not have resisted rape or murder. Faced with her abdication of will, with its implied collapse of human psychology, a protective group began to define itself in the audience. When a loaded gun was thrust to Marina's head and her own finger was being worked around the trigger, a fight broke out between the audience factions. By the time the performance had completed, Abramovic, dripping with her own blood and tears, acknowledged a fear of direct confrontation in her once willing audience. As soon as she became a person again and no longer an object for them to do with as they pleased, they had become unable to face her as that person, unable to look her in the eyes or address her given what they had done in the preceding hours. Despite Rhythm Zero being considered one of the most powerful performance pieces on record, the artist was not left without her own scars. I feel the need to make note that Rhythm Zero was actually the final installment in a series of performative pieces, all of which focused on Abramovic relinquishing control or offering her physical safety as tribute for her own art. Rhythm 10 saw her cut up her fingers. During Rhythm 5, she lost consciousness due to smoke inhalation in the middle of a burning star and was rescued by audience members, much to her dismay. In Rhythm 2, she ingested 2 pills, one to treat catatonia and the other schizophrenia, and experienced the effects live in front of an audience. And in Rhythm 4, once again, she pushed herself to her limits by inhaling air from an industrial fan, fell unconscious, and was helped by gallery staff, again to her dismay. These pieces serve to dehumanize the artist, the proverbial object the audience is given carte blanche to shape however they wish, and witness to what extent the participants will push their own limits when confronted with an object that doesn't fight back. How much of the behavior is innate? How much is pressured? Will humans cater to a moral code even when there is no punishment from deviating from it? How much is a person willing to do to another who has never harmed them? How much will people hurt one another given the chance? How far will people go? Obviously, quite far. It will come as no surprise to learn that not everyone liked these performances. If we were to judge it by the ridiculous standards presented before, where an artist creating a character with self-harm scars based on themselves is inherently bad, and promoting self-harm, then how would one address a piece that was the viewer doing the damage? A piece that turns the artist into a canvas that would then be harmed as a part of the presentation, anticipated beforehand or not. Harm effectively became a part of these pieces, and the issue, as previously presented, was the showcasing of physical harm, correct? With those standards in mind, would the artist be at fault for presenting themselves as their canvas? Would the audience be at fault for indulging the intentions of the artist? Would the gallery be at fault for hosting what would become such a damaging and disturbing presentation? Is the artist to blame for any trauma felt by the audience members, or is it their own fault for acting upon the piece as they saw fit? The participants who acted upon the objects were given a variety of options in terms of the tools they used, and were given absolutely no guidelines as to what actions to take. So are the actions uniquely their fault? Was it a building of atmosphere that caused people to increasingly dehumanize Abramovic? Was it people taking advantage of the atmosphere to do as they pleased? Or was it a matter of people challenging Abramovic's constitution and not knowing where to draw that line? There's no real easy single answer, and that's the point. Art does not have to be black and white, good or bad. Shades of gray exist, my dudes. You would think that a bunch of artists would know that. Now, one would hope that no sane person would say that Abramovic was at fault and that because she didn't object to being harmed by her audience participants, she's a bad person for creating harmful content and putting it out in the world. Let's be real, without a trigger warning, this was the 70s, but you know, there's gonna be someone. The point is, you can likely recognize that controversial art that is far worse than they draw their own self-harm scars exists and is permitted to exist. So again, why would people think it was totally okay to try and cancel an artist for creating pieces with uncomfortable topics? Unsatisfied with the example of an artist turning what is effectively their own trauma and powerlessness into an art piece? Okay, what about art that's controversial because of the subject matter portrayed and the grotesque execution? Eating People was a performative installation created by Chinese contemporary artist Zhu Yu. His art, which tends to draw attention through shock value, tends to also question moral agendas, and he is widely considered one of the most controversial artists in China. So it may not seem like much of a stretch to hear that in 2000 he performed a piece centered around the topic of cannibalism. Eating People was a conceptual modern art piece that saw him cook and eat what was alleged to be a human fetus. While the exhibit was promptly removed, the photographs taken that would have served as the exhibit themselves in the days after the initial presentation survived and found their way online as part of tabloid gossip in the form of, "Oh my god, you guys, the Chinese literally eat babies!" In response to public criticism, Zhu Yu said, "I herewith announce my intention and my aim to eat people as a protest against mankind's moral idea that he/she cannot eat people. No religion forbids cannibalism, nor can I find any law which prevents us from eating people. I took advantage of the space between morality and the law and based my work on it." Based on this, despite the work being visually grotesque and seemingly promoting the fact that there is no direct law against cannibalism for you to cite, it's totally legal. Morally questionable and visually disturbing, yes, but legal. Even if he did eat a human fetus, which, yeah, no, he probably just made meat look like a baby. He is an artist after all. His art piece exists in the boundary between law and morality. We know cannibalism is wrong, and so seeing someone enact it upon a helpless infant, something that most of us are pretty protective of, elicits a visceral disturbance in the audience. Despite that, it's not illegal. Something that we know to be wrong, deplorable, and seemingly a criminal act isn't against the law. So what does that say about law and morality? If you guess that it doesn't always coincide, you would be right. So what you're saying is, disturbing art, though it may make us uncomfortable, has the right to exist within the confines of the law. Weird, what a novel concept. And realistically, that's just applying to artists who want their work to remain within the confines of the law, because yeah, even when you say as long as it's not illegal, it's fine, excuse me, there are still going to be artists who flagrantly throw their art in the law's face, and people will still argue the value and merit of those works. Banksy would actually fall into this camp. Because of the places Banksy chooses to display their works, while widely adored and with efforts to protect them, legally, it just boils down to the work being vandalism. It could then be argued that Banksy's street art could be promoting or, dear God, glorifying the vandalism of public property. It could even be further argued that public response turning Banksy into the widely recognized name we know today only serves to exemplify the problem and prove that the work is being put up on a pedestal despite technically being illegal. Want to argue that work that has intense meaning behind it should be preserved and that this creates an exception? Okay, so might I then introduce you to Dadaism? An art movement that spawned during the First World War from a collection of anti-war artists who sought refuge in Switzerland. In February 1916, Hugo Ball and Emmy Hemmings opened the Cabaret Voltaire, which would become a hub for avant-garde artists to voice their distaste of the pointless horrors of war. As a means of expressing their rejection of the war and the aesthetics of modern capitalist society, Dada artists met such perceived pointlessness in equal measure, creating artwork out of nonsense and irrationality. In 1913, Marcel Duchamp coined the phrase anti-art as a means of describing art that challenged the definition of art as it was known, and this would later fit perfectly into the Dadaist movement. Dadaism is characterized by spontaneity, humor, freedom, irrationalism, and nonsense. Some examples of Dadaist pieces include Optophone 1, Francis Picabia, 1922, Fountain, Marcel Duchamp, 1917, The Art Critic, Raoul Haussmann, 1919-1920, The Scat Players, Otto Dix, 1920, Cut with a Kitchen Knife, Dada Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epoch of Germany, Hannah Hawk, 1919, Rayograph, Man Ray, 1922, Mustache Hat, Hans Arp, 1932, Switzerland, Birthplace of Dada, Max Ernst, 1920. Mind you, I'm only including visual pieces as they're easier to demonstrate. The Dada movement spanned not just the visual arts of painting, collage, photography, and sculpture, but also poetry and sound media. Contextually, these pieces had historical and emotional reasons behind their creation, but the pieces themselves are touted as nonsense, and therefore exist without a strong meaning being present in the art itself. Yet that lack of sense is a part of the piece, so even if one wants to argue that these works have no reason to exist because there is no reason behind them, that's the point. That lack of reason is the reason behind the piece, and the pieces themselves exist to highlight that fact. It's basically a paradox. Confusing, I know, just roll with it. At the end of the day, the gist is that artistic works, even without a perceptible reason to exist, or theme portrayed with purpose, are still allowed to exist, even if the presentation of the piece itself is prone to evoke confusion, distaste, or anger. Art can evolve many feelings in the viewer, and should not be permitted to exist exclusively based on whether it promotes positive or negative feelings in a viewer. Yes, a viewer, as in a single viewer's opinion. In that same regard, pieces that inadvertently evoke disgust, discomfort, or traumatic memories, much like the pieces in the situation I've been complaining about for however many minutes, even without a meaning perceptible to the viewer, should be allowed to exist on the merit of them being artistic works. Art can be without meaning, or can have a disturbing meaning. Art can teeter on the boundaries of law and morality, or be directly within them. Art can be thrown in the face of law and expectations. Art can exist purely for the sake of existing and be allowed to exist. Controversial art, no matter what side of the controversy you stand on, is allowed to exist. There will always be varying degrees of consequences that an artist must take on for the creation of their works. For Yoko Ono and Marina Abramovic, the consequences came from the pieces themselves as the public humiliation of the artists, their trauma, and the criticism of their work to follow. For Zhu Yu, it would be the acceptance that a viscerally disturbing piece might be removed from public viewing because it's too intense for the general population, and a gallery has the right to do that, as well as the rumors and disgust that would arise from people assuming the artist ate an infant. Although you could still count the media reaction to those images alone artful in and of itself, not in a good way, but still. For Banksy, it comes from the risk of where he places his art, the consequences being that his work can be written off as vandalism, or, in turn, vandalized by other street artists. An artist should be prepared to deal with the consequences of their own pieces, although even in instances where the artist isn't prepared, it doesn't mean that the art should not then exist. It just, in general, works out better if an artist knows how to deal with the public response to the works they put out into that public, because they can then appropriately display and market those works. In an online setting, that might manifest as, trigger warnings and preemptive acknowledgements of the work before a viewer is able to dive into the gallery. I hope by this point my dissatisfaction with a bunch of artists touting that another artist's work shouldn't exist is becoming more and more understandable. Part 2. Subjectivity. Something we should all start learning in kindergarten is that not everybody is the same. Even discounting physical differences, we all have different life experiences, dreams, traumas, struggles, strengths, and opinions. We like and dislike different things. We have different fears, different aspirations, different favorite animals. Basically, everything that makes you, you, could be the exact opposite for somebody else, or equally, everything that makes up someone else could be completely different in you. In this regard, we acknowledge that everyone has a right to exist. Everyone is valid, be it their experiences, their feelings, or their right to live on this planet, provided their wants and actions do not impede the ability for someone else to live their lives the way that they want to. Everyone should be allowed to live their lives. You want to decorate your house with tacky garden gnomes because they make you smile? Go for it. You want to learn how to surf so you can go out and befriend dolphins? Weird, but I support your drive. You want to only buy green things because it's your favorite color? You go, Grandma. You want to tattoo yourself blue because it helps you come out of your shell? Who's gonna stop you? As long as you're not breaking the law where you live, theoretically you should be able to live your life however you see fit. But I think we all know that life isn't quite as simple as all that. Some people just really want to insert themselves into other people's business and tell them what they can and can't do. Karens. And that usually happens to coincide with what they're personally comfortable with, not taking into consideration anyone else's comfort or tolerance levels. They might even tell you what art is and isn't allowed to exist based on their own personal subjectivity. Art Karens. How dare Galleria della Commedia display the statue of David to the public? Don't they know that you can see his penis? Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? Subjectivity is the phenomena by which everyone reacts to their experiences of the world differently, whether in thought or by action. It is, in a sense, the opposite of objective reality, something which can theoretically be measured and viewed in a manner that remains constant, whereas subjectivity is the human brain's ability to take that constant and change perception of it based on personal feelings or opinions. For example, let's bring back Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. Objectively, objectivity only deals with perceptible and replicatable reality as it is understood. Objectively, this piece is a porcelain urinal on display, signed with the pseudonym R. Mutt, and the date of its creation, 1917. Subjectively, this piece could be a representation of the disposability of modern art. The placement of it, along with its flowing porcelain curves, could be seen as feminine and equally designed for the function of male genitalia. It could be taken as commentary on artists who are so willing to sign their names to unfinished or lackluster pieces without consideration for what their name is then attached to. The use of a ready-made object, in particular one used for plumbing, could be seen as bringing focus to and putting on a pedestal the only worthwhile contribution a civilization has to offer. It could be seen as a mockery of gallery work and the process of analyzing art to find deeper meaning. Other possible meanings for the R. Mutt signature present the option that this pedestal-placed piece could be a stand-in for a golden calf, the overall visuals mocking such an interpretation and worship. All of these are subjective interpretations of the meaning behind this piece. None of them are objectively correct, but in that sense, none of them are then objectively wrong either. Someone's subjective reading of an art piece has to do with who they are as a person, what they've experienced, what they value in life, and all that wonderful hullabaloo that makes us all individuals. What you see in an art piece reflects what you have seen before, I suppose, unless you're an art critic trying to discern the original intention from the mind of the artist themselves, but we're more referring to layman audience members here. This is why different art pieces speak differently to the viewer depending on who is viewing them. Art can be about confronting visuals that remind us of past events or traumas, forcing us to confront our own demons in an effort to enjoy an artwork peacefully. Or art can be about reminding us of good times, capturing the moments we wish we could live through forever. Subjectivity applies to the execution of an art piece too, let's not forget to point that out. Drawings are not a direct mirror of reality. They are an interpretation of reality, and the nature of that interpretation changes from person to person and from artist to artist. Two people could draw the exact same scene or object, and each piece would still be different because of the different ways the artists approach and translate this experience. Van Gogh's Starry Night and Wenzel Hablick's Starry Sky are completely different pieces and experiences, despite both of them being paintings of the night sky. This applies to all art, so even if two artists approach pieces covering the very same topics or using the same single muse, they will ultimately produce different results because the subjective tastes of each artist goes directly into their work. Obviously, there can be cases where people can force different pieces to look the same, but I'm not really talking about those situations now, am I? Now, while we've acknowledged that subjective opinion, while not objectively correct, is still valid to a degree, it is only valid to those who perceive it in the same fashion. By that I mean that someone's subjective opinion does not change the state of the artwork itself. So while a person might take away a very specific reading from an art piece, that reading does not mean that that was the intended outcome. While an artist cannot control what each individual person sees within their work, they can make an attempt to evoke a very specific emotion or understanding. A variety of factors exist that determine whether an artist succeeds in this endeavor: skill, medium, execution, imagery, perceptible context, sheer luck, etc. But even if an artist lacks the ability to make their intention known, a lack of concrete understanding of an art piece does not then necessitate a subjective opinion taking that role in its stead. Basically, just because you can't immediately discern the intended meaning behind a work of art doesn't mean you can then insert a subjective audience opinion and tout that as the artist's true original intention. I'll use one of my own pieces for an example here. This is a piece I did a while back. Contextually, it was done in response to a frustrating situation where I had attempted to give someone the benefit of the doubt, only for that to be thrown back at me. The titular face rip action is a direct visual reading of what I was feeling in the moment. Disappointment and rage to such an extent that I felt as though I wanted to peel my own face off. I attempted to further elicit the rage through what is essentially Lovecraftian visuals, as the central figure can be seen nearing the opening in what one could assume is a cave ceiling, creating a scene where a terrifying creature sheds its skin in preparation for an ascent. The skin is removed to reveal the horrifying face that will grace the surface and express that rage in full. It was a vent piece. I made it specifically to vent my frustrations. As the artist, I get to say what the piece is and is not about. Now, if someone were to look at it and instead view it as a transformative piece, they would not be wrong in their interpretation. Perhaps they view it as less of a piece of rage and more as one of self-discovery or acceptance, where a person is shedding their old skin and coming into themselves, whether that new inner self is a monster or not. Perhaps they see it as a necessary step before a journey into the unknown, where a person must remove what makes them human in order to ascend to an equally terrifying and unforgiving world. Contextually and emotionally, these interpretations are vastly different from what was intended, reflecting exactly how different the audience readings of a piece can be from what the artist reads. Sort of a what do the blue curtains mean thing. Yes, the curtains could represent melancholy, or sadness, or nostalgia for sunny days, or calmness, or it could just be blue curtains. This is why it's ludicrous to take the audience's subjective opinions about a piece and present them as the true intentions behind the artwork. They can be so removed from the artist's original vision that they're not even comparable. It takes a single person's, or maybe multiple people's, opinion based on their own likes and personal tastes and forces it into everyone else's face. Equally, presenting it as a fact, or presenting it as though this was the artist's intent in the first place, interrupts another person's ability to enjoy the piece. If you're presented with an art piece you've never seen before, along with someone who doesn't like said piece, telling you all the reasons why the artwork is awful and why the artist is an awful person for making a piece with such vile meaning behind it, the meaning of which is assumed, you are then robbed of the opportunity of seeing the piece as it was originally intended, without that additional, potentially completely unrelated, context tainting that view. You can no longer see the piece without the knowledge of that subjective interpretation coloring your own interpretation. Sure, you can try to take a look at the piece through objective eyes, but you still might have that little voice in the back of your head screaming about how the work glorifies mental health struggles. Probably made worse if the person promoting their own subjective opinion either already doesn't like the artist, or else doesn't understand what they're talking about and therein miss out on a lot of themes or visuals present in the work necessary for a proper reading. Even in pieces that directly display disturbing imagery, the audience's interpretation of that imagery and the reason for its presence changes from person to person. Someone could see it as a reflection of modern society, whereas another person could see it as a superfluous shock value for the sake of being edgy. If the latter audience member were to then promote their interpretation as the factual intention behind the piece, those who believed them would then look at the artwork and only view it as provocative shock, and they would completely miss out on what those provocative elements mean. They could then devalue the art and the efforts of the artist by underplaying any visceral or disturbing imagery as just being a means of promoting ill values. You drew cannibalism? It must be because you're promoting cannibalism. You drew self-harm scars? It must be because you're promoting self-harm. You drew a young-looking cartoon character? It must be because you're promoting pedophilia. All of these uncharitable interpretations take a single aspect of a piece and boil the rest of the work down to being just that. It completely destroys the agency of the artist by claiming that any visual interpretation of an uncomfortable topic inherently glorifies or promotes said topic. How is anyone supposed to talk about anything uncomfortable if whenever they do, their work is boiled down to the promotion of said uncomfortable topic simply because they brought it up? What about the question of why it's there? What does it show? Can it be read as an allegory for something else? No, instead if you draw a character with self-harm scars, that means you're promoting self-harm. No ifs, ands, or buts! In that regard, my piece also directly shows the center-focus figure effectively harming themselves in a fit of rage, so is my artwork then promoting self-harm and rage? Come on, Kaimarama, cancel me already! Part 3, Relatability. If you've seen this Vine,
I do that.
Then you might already know where I'm coming from. Much in the same way that people surround themselves and have a preference for art that speaks to them personally, people like things that they can relate to. This tends to be why relatable content is so popular. People enjoy seeing recreations or references to things that they do or they enjoy because it elicits a feeling of being included or being in a community. Human beings generally like to feel as though they belong, and an acknowledgement of mutual behavior between multiple people happens to be a really easy way to evoke that. Someone makes a Vine about the exaggerated and strange way that children gulp down a drink on a hot day, taking massive, noticeable, audible breaths between each swallow. Haha, I did that. How funny. Someone talks about how they pretended like all the other cars on the road are racing you, except for the ones that pass you by. I remember doing that. Glad I wasn't the only one. Someone regales about how they made things up about themselves to seem more interesting online when they were a teenager. Glad my teenage cringiness wasn't unique. This is why art is so great. It speaks to everyone individually, and so those who are able to relate to an aspect of the work that they subjectively glean can enjoy it based on how they relate to it. Just like subjectivity, people relate to art for a variety of different reasons that also tend to be related to their own personal tastes. If someone finds something to be relatable, but it's for a reason that it's something that they don't want to acknowledge, then they won't be as attached to an art piece that evokes that specific feeling, rather than perhaps another piece. Maybe the relatable feelings bring up an action from the past that this person is ashamed of. On the one hand, they could take solace in knowing that other people performed the same embarrassing action, but on the other hand, they could be equally ashamed of those people. In this sense, we can separate relatable content into negative and positive associations, where positive relatable content evokes feelings of nostalgia, camaraderie, and happiness, and where negative relatable content can bring up bad memories, trauma, sadness, shame, or anger. Usually, people will gravitate towards positive relatable content, but sometimes people will gravitate towards negative content, that being relatable content that evokes negative emotions from the viewer. This could be art that brings up past trauma, art that encourages lapses in moral judgment, art that elicits emotions like sadness or rage, and yes, I am gonna bring it up, art that serves to be a negative emotional trigger. Now, some people have gotten it into their heads not only that 1, artwork that triggers that negative emotional response puts the artist at blame, and that 2, artwork that triggers them personally should not be permitted. But realistically, where's the cutoff point for that? We already know that since everyone is different, everyone views artwork differently, so even if one person has a negative emotional response to a piece, that doesn't mean that the person standing beside them will too. So let's say we have person A who has a negative emotional reaction to a piece of art. They then state that the art should not be allowed to exist as it does. In contrast, let's introduce person B, who has a positive emotional reaction to the same piece that caused person A to have a negative one. Does the positive emotional response elicited in person B balance out the want from person A to destroy that harmful content? Is it just a matter of having to prove that positive emotional reactions can be brought up from pieces that give others emotional turmoil? Well, no. We've already gone on about how controversial art and art that you flat out just don't like has the right to exist, whether you like it or not. The proper response here then should be for person A to remove themselves from a position where they are able to see the art piece in question. Ideally, person B could, take it home or something, I don't know. Point is, eliminate the artwork and vilify the artist should not be a person's immediate go-to when being confronted with art they don't like. And yes, I know that the situation I'm attaching this to had other elements that made the person want to vilify the artist, but I'm specifically talking about the one to vilify the artist from the content they create, so it doesn't matter. People should be allowed to choose what relatable content they want to surround themselves with. If that content happens to be something that doesn't work for you, that sucks, but it's not being catered specifically to you, so why should you even care? You can hate the color of your neighbor's garage door, but you can't call the cops on them for it. I guess unless you live in a homeowners association run neighborhood, but you get what I mean. Plus, I'm sorry, but there's always going to be some manner of weird, gory, edgy, controversial content that you don't like. As the internet expands further and further, that amount of content you dislike is really only just going to increase. Hey, but so will the content that you do like, so bonus, I guess. Oh, what's that? There's this very specific type of edgy content that this one person makes that you feel is bad because it fails to cover the topics in a mature manner? Oh, and it's content made by a younger artist? Wow! All of a sudden, I don't care. It's almost like younger artists are inherently going to struggle with portraying certain themes in their work in an accurate or constructive manner because they lack the life experiences, forethought, and personal knowledge to recognize those issues. Who could have guessed? Maybe it would be more productive to help them understand it rather than berate them for not immediately inherently understanding all psychology about mental health when it's constantly changing. I said I was gonna get miffed. Look, I've had a DeviantArt account since I was 15. I have seen the rotating roster of edgy, gore-filled, exploitative content time and time again. There was the slew of Joan and Vasquez fans who would create their own insane, murderous content in the vein of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. There was a drastic surge in edgy, gory horror content when creepypastas exploded. There was that time gore and body horror art became popular because Elfin Lied was a thing. There was the trend of drawing your characters murdering the characters of other artists you don't like. I actually covered a different situation where someone did just that. There was literally even a meme circulating at one point where you could show off where your permanent scars were located. So why everyone is getting into such a tizzy about it now, I can't fathom. You guys talk about how, oh my gosh, this is just the worst thing ever. Meanwhile, there's a backlog of 200 different artists who have content that's just as, quote-unquote, bad, if not worse, and nobody bats an eye because they don't have a personal vendetta against the artist who made it. I've sort of veered off course at this point, so why don't we just switch over to Part 4! Blah blah blah, I'm so annoyed, feel my frustration seep from this video. Let's be real, you guys. In any other situation of censorship, one would expect artists to campaign for freedom of expression, given that it's sort of the whole thing they do. I understand wanting to protect people, especially those who struggle with mental health issues, and obviously you don't want someone who self-harms to see self-harm in artwork and then relapse. Look, I get it. But if just seeing self-harm scars in an art piece is enough for a person to start harming themselves again, I think that hints towards other problems just below the surface. If you're young enough that it's just a matter of you being impressionable, then you probably shouldn't be online in the first place. I see plenty of art that people draw of their characters murdering people. It's not uncommon to see stuff of that nature dressed up to be more romantic either. Murderers and serial killers are romanticized to the nth degree. Jeff the Killer and his many fangirls, anyone? Are we now expecting this artwork to encourage people to go out and kill someone? No! The Slender Man stabbing doesn't count! Those were literal children who believed that Slender Man was a real creature who would come and kill them, and one of the assailants suffered from undiagnosed schizophrenia. I'm moving on. Controversial art, in and of itself, has a right to exist. It's art. I'm into vulture culture for spooky season's sake. It's basically making art out of roadkill. You think there isn't someone out there who absolutely hates that idea, thinks it's disgusting, and would want me to stop? Of course there is! But someone hating what I choose to make doesn't disallow me from making it or enjoying it. Actually, can I just talk for a minute about the fervent obsession over not letting people copy your art? Yeah, that was another big thing in this situation, the claim that an artist was bad because they were copying elements from someone else's art and characters and then incorporating it into their own work. Now, mind you, most of the claims in that regard were really stupid. It was stuff like, my character wears red eyeliner and you drew your character wearing red eyeliner, so you copied me and fuck you for doing it. No, I'm not kidding. But then there were also the general claims of, you're copying me between artists. I use pastel gore and you started using pastel gore. Copying me. I made a short character with horns and you made a short character with horns. Copying me. I'm the creator of Blue Dogs, and if you ever have a dog that's blue, you're copying me. Who gets angry when they learn that other people are inspired by their art? Like, what? Who? What? That shit's flattering! Someone thinks your art is so lovely that they want to incorporate the elements they're most drawn to in that art into their own works. They're trying to build a style that they think fits what they want to put out into the world or matches their perspectives, and your art style is like the thing they want to put in a little time capsule for future generations. A little of this, a tad of that, and ba-boom! You got a brand new magical thing, it's beautiful. Why would you be offended by that? Why should you be offended by that? Sure, yeah, it's superficial and lame if someone just copies your work because it's the new hot commodity or something, or because they're jealous and they just want to be you because that's more of a case of exploitation and not genuine appreciation. But has that been the case here? I don't think so, so who gives a shit? Everyone here freaks out if someone takes inspiration from them, but will gladly take inspiration from others. Just, this is ridiculous. Y'all sound like insufferable cunts getting mad that someone copied your poofy hairstyle or red eyeliner or a fucking egg on your head. Oh, careful, guys. The eyelashes are sacred. Honestly, I don't know how so many people can just hear someone voice an opinion of art and be like, yep, that sounds like a fact. What happened to critical thinking skills? Or just judging for yourself? You guys need some serious, deep reflective time if you think that censorship to protect the fifis was a legitimate gripe. Protect the children, sure, but don't destroy something else to do it. What are you, a barbarian? Me no like, me smash. Me no like, me wanna talk to your manager. Ugh. Artists being oversensitive and trying to ruin people on gossip? Wish I could say I was surprised, but then I'd be lying. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed my angry rambling about how artistic censorship for the sake of individual fifis is stupid. And there's definitely a good chunk of it out there that would make me really uncomfortable. I mean, did you see fleshlets? That's disgusting. But one of the great things about art is that even if one piece doesn't speak to you, another will. And maybe the pieces that made me uncomfortable will end up comforting someone else. Art is magic. So guys, don't be a naive, hypocritical art goblin and try to vilify someone for your subjective reading of their art. Be a magical art fairy. And on that note, thanks for the hecking magical fan art, you fairies. We'll start things off aggressive with Ponder by Prussian Venom. Fight me. I may not be able to see it, but Prussian Venom gets across that she's probably staring us down and will start throwing punches. The text just confirms it. For some sporadic fun, we move on over to Mecha by Casual Flash, having a little technical fun with their faceplate, managing to look a little more put together in casual style. Even Mecha's like, wait, I am doing this right? Processing. Emmy Ann graces us with chibi cuteness in the form of their Ponder Sprocket chibi sketch and finished piece, with such a lovely shine added in to help the colors pop. Fiend down there making happy squid noises because he's colored in so nice, looking it beautiful. Hatching out the borders of your heart, here's Messing Around with Brushes by Curacino. This kind of stuff's always cool. When you're experimenting with art programs, it always makes for such interesting looks, and I thank you for having my character be a part of that process. That's hella flattering! Perfectly describing most of my life, here's I Made an Attempt by Supers, an epic spiky-haired piece out here making me look like a suave motherfucker. Look at me! Now I am the smooth anime boy. I have legs for days! For the droolies, we turn to Ponder Sprocket Fanart by Shiny Roppy. I hope I said your name right! Where Ponder Sprocket has either just seen someone super hot, or there's a delicious buffet right off screen. Fiend only seems mildly curious about it, so my money is on super hot person. Sliding in for the green team, here's, and I argue this title, Best Gal by Nyx the Darling, making like, goddamn, can you be jealous of a cartoon's hair? I'm jealous of a cartoon's hair. If only I could get my hair to look half as good as that. Jealous success story. Screaming into a nebulous void, Ponder is fucking pissed by PC Vaughn shows us what happens when someone gets on Ponder Sprocket's bad side. I'd scream, but I'd wake up my dog. Girl, what that mouth do? It yells much profanity at spiteful idiots. And for contrast, we have Sweet Bean Berry by Critter of Egypt, taking the fluffy baby and fluffing them up to the extreme. Avert your gaze if you're allergic to cuteness. This strawberry is almost as big as my head. The benefit of being so small is that your food is gonna last you a really long time. Give the baby half a day's rations, feed the baby for a week. Getting ready for cuddle time, here's Octomama by Puppy Power 123. This is the cutest heckin' thing. Look, it's like Fiend's all nervous, trying to hold back his Ponder's hand. She's all like, shh, just look, it's fine, buddy, it's fine. And then boom, cuddle time. Precious love. There's something very adorable about furry creatures hugging cephalopods, and not just because this particular furry creature also happens to be adorable. For your tease of the day, Ultra Trash Boy treats us to some fan art. Did you happen to want Sailor Fuku Ponder Sprocket? With a sway of her hips and a flick of Ultra Flash Boy's pen. Wish granted. Look at that hair. Look at them hips. Look at them lips. Portray her as pristine anime girl. Get on fan art feature. Question mark. Profit. Because we needed something to tide us over until next I commission them, here's Proto and Mecha by Desicos, with their character Proto being very curious of a poor, baffled Mecha. Interesting seeing these two together because, fun fact, Mecha was originally going to have 4 arms. Neat. Look at how light and agile he is. Don't worry, Proto is a good boy. He won't eat Mecha. Metal doesn't taste very good. Looming above you like a proud parent about to give you the head pats, it's Ponder Sprocket by Chaos Phoenix, accenting our big, beautiful blue babe with a fun orange watercolor background and some tentacles to act as a frame for the fun. Hella nice compositioning there. Being a little baby bean, we finish off with a thank you stem by Sylvia Arts 2000 because I doled out some advice and then Sylvia was like, yo, thanks! How about I draw an awesome cheek-smushingly adorable picture of your sweet dandelion child? And then I screamed because fluffy baby! If you happen to like any of these pieces, please don't hesitate to send some love to the artist through the links I have provided for your convenience down in the description. You can send your own fan art of any of my characters to emptycomicsfanart@outlook.com. Send some much-needed love over to today's editor because they're all awesome and deserve it. My links are also down there if you're so inclined. And with that, have fun never trying to offend people with your art, you silly, silly goobers.